Ladies and gentlemen, I am Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is October 3rd, 2022. This is your daily Ukraine update, and we are going to be asking ourselves, is Kherson about to have its Kharkiv offensive moment? And is Russia losing control of even its own propagandists? Let's get into it. There's a lot to unpack today, and none of it is particularly good for Russia. So first off, as we talked about in previous videos, the threat of encirclement of Borova was significant, and it looks like the Russian forces were forced to recognize this as they withdrew from Borova and allowed it to be seized by Ukrainian forces. This is definitely the right call, but it again is a testament to the fact that Russian forces at this point are of such low morale, poor quality, and poor logistics that even at defensive positions where realistically they've had several days to reinforce Borova, and yet they still can't rely on it as a defensive strong point. Instead, they're going to be forced to withdraw yet again, giving more territory to Ukrainian forces. And you can see here, right, the next withdrawal is going to be right here in Oh, man, why do they have such terrible names? Kuliavkivka. Right. Now, the question, of course, is can Russia, with its current troop makeup, even effectively establish a front line anywhere? Geographically, it may not be possible. Usually, as we've discussed, they were for a brief period of time after losing tremendous amounts of territory in Kharkiv in this Ukrainian counteroffensive. They used the Oskil as a defensive barrier, but the Ukrainians affected not just one, but two major bridge crossings at Dovorichna and Kupiansk, and have pushed this into a single large front, coupled with their advances to the south near Borova, seizing Lyman, obviously from basically Borova down to Yampil. And you can see here that it appears that there might be even another link up as Russian forces withdraw, giving Ukrainians a single unified front stretching from basically the outskirts of Lysychansk all the way to potentially Kupiansk, which is a huge, huge gain. I mean, again, when we pan out to the map, right, there was obviously this spectacular offensive by Ukrainian forces into, east of Kharkiv. But now you see seizing this significant chunk of territory here is honestly comparable, especially given the fact that as they get closer to Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, you're looking at more and more tactically and operationally significant areas. We can see here on the map, right, many of these, this territory seized are small villages, right, a few major roadways, and while all, of course, when you're liberating your country, all territory is valuable from a operational and military perspective. Seizures like Izium and Lyman are significantly more valuable simply because you can see Lyman's a major rail hub, and Izium is at a major intersection of several significant roadways and highways, right? You can see there's 4 roadways here that will take you to other major urban areas. So good news for Ukrainians, still bad news for the Russians, who just simply can't seem to stabilize anything. Now, when we look to the south, we see that we might just be looking at the same sort of encirclement that we saw in Lyman and Borova. It might be playing out here. As we advance through the timeline, you can see that things have been stable, and then suddenly Ukrainian forces appeared to achieve a level of breakthrough here against the Kakhovka Reservoir, and are starting to engage in something that looks like an encirclement, particularly of Russian forces in this area here. Reason you can see that Ukrainian forces are beginning to push Russians back outside of Bruskaneski. And it's believed that there's a Russian headquarters element, right, just a few kilometers from the front line now. This is, if you remember in the Kharkiv offensive, you saw a lot of Russian headquarters start to be seized. And once that happened, the ability of the Russians to coordinate their defensive operations became very, very, very limited. And so you may see it. It's harder to do an encirclement simply because of this reservoir forming a boundary. But if the Ukrainian forces can advance perhaps to Duchany and can push a little bit here, when we look at the actual roadways, you can see there's actually not very good roadways, ways to effect a withdrawal. These all look like very small rural roads that may not even be able to accommodate tanks or armored combat vehicles going in two directions. So it simply might be easier for Ukrainians to effect an encirclement because it's really hard to withdraw through some of these crazy rural roads. I mean, look, if you were, let's say you were a Russian troop, let's say you were a Russian battalion right here at Velka Oleksandrivka. You would have to withdraw through this road here, turn south, go east again at Borozenki, right? And you can see that you're going to pass sometimes disturbingly close to Ukrainian lines, right? This is probably, 10 kilometers from the current positions. But if Ukrainians can seize another 5 or 6, all of a sudden, troops in here that need to withdraw will be in danger in the process. They could also, of course, push all the way here, go up against the reservoir and go south. But again, Ukrainian forces, a little bit of advancement, and you see how trapping troops here can be done by cutting off routes to exfil here and here. So you may start to see some level of encirclement and panic by Russian forces as they realize that they really are not going to be able to escape effectively. And hopefully, well, I mean, not hopefully, you don't, what Russians don't want to see is, again, their troops getting trapped, encircled, and annihilated, which is, again, what they're in danger of if they cannot exercise proper command and control. Now let's talk about why there seems to be a tremendous command and control failure, right? So first, let's pivot here, where the Institute for the Study of War has actually a special report that they release these sort of reports every so often. But what's interesting is it covers the degradation of what they call the information space. And this is Russia's efforts to create a narrative about how the war is going. And there's been a number of wrenches thrown in their efforts, not the least of which is the fact that they're losing the war quite badly. As of right now, momentum has swung firmly to the Ukrainian forces, almost comically, honestly. Like, if you haven't noticed, even I start to feel like almost I feel bad for the Russian conscripts, but the fact that Russia it's almost like they don't have command of their forces anymore. That's just how bizarre this reversal of fortune has been for them. But you can see here that so obviously there's the wrench in the Russian information efforts of the fact that they're losing the war quite badly, that they're drafting largely incompetent and inequipped reserves who are going to be sent to the front and basically be used as target practice by Ukrainian forces that actually have not just proper equipment, but appear to be committed to properly training their forces. All of this has made the mill bloggers, Kremlin propagandists actually start to break from their message. Even Kremlin-sponsored television programs are criticizing Putin's decision to annex these regions before securing their borders or even stabilizing the front lines. Kremlin propagandists acknowledge and don't even conceal their disappointment that the partial mobilization is an ongoing absolute disaster, discussing the illegal mobilization of some men and noting that issues like alcoholism and drug use are really common among these newly mobilized forces. If you know anything about alcoholism, you know that getting sober and conducting military operations are mutually exclusive for sure. Detoxing from alcohol use is a painful and potentially actually lethal process. And of course, some people are even saying on Kremlin television that mobilization will not generate the force necessary to regain battlefield initiatives, given the poor quality of Russian soldiers. This is huge that even the Kremlin's mouthpieces are starting to say that this is preposterous nonsense. And when we go over to ground.news, right, one of the best sources for information in this war, simply because they allow us to see the way the same story is covered across the political spectrum. As always, you can check it out for free. I have a link in the description. But according to this story, half of mobilized men in Russia, in one Russian region, are sent home, and the commissar has been fired. That is how unpopular this mobilization has been, and how outraged Russians are that the stated qualifications of mobilized forces and the actual forces being mobilized, people being mobilized, are just completely at odds, as discussed. Too old, very sick, families, students, farmers, people who should be excluded from this conscription order by Russia's own statement, are instead being wrapped up in this conflict. And as discussed, the Russians are pretty outraged about it. And as I've talked about, you don't want civilians on the battlefield, and they're civilians. If you don't get military training, it doesn't matter if you put on a uniform and are given a rifle, you're a civilian. They are a liability to combat units. I'm shocked that combat commanders, and I suspect that privately, combatant commanders for Russia have probably said to Russia's Ministry of Defense, do not send us untrained conscripts. We do not have the training capabilities when we're unable to fight and win on the battlefield. We are definitely not going to be able to fight and win on the battlefield and also train civilians into competent soldiers. And one of the things Russia did early in the war is cleared out its training brigades. Many of the units that exist simply are equipped and trained themselves only to take civilians and convert them into trained military specialists, or take conscripts who finish their basic training, give them military specialization training. Those units have been cleared out and sent to the front lines. They were months ago, meaning that there's no one left to train these troops. This is a sort of a downward spiral, a death spiral for a military when you lose the ability to train your forces, to generate new competent forces to replace losses. It's a sign that, that you're well on your way to exactly what is happening to the Russians now, which is losses on all fronts. Even though numerically they may be perhaps roughly on par with Ukrainian forces, simply the degradation of the quality of the forces has been so bad that they now are just getting just unable to stand up to Ukrainian forces that, again, remember, literally have just finished seizing massive amounts of territory. The Ukrainian forces are stretched as thin as they have been in this war, and yet they're simply more effective than Russia's combat forces, Russia's remaining combat forces. And one other story that I thought was interesting is that reportedly, this is a screenshot right here of the mobilized Russian soldiers are expected to bring for themselves. This is not like totally atypical. For example, when I deployed, I was told, hey, bring your razor blades, bring some shaving cream, bring some baby wipes. Those you were expected to go and purchase on your own. But the things on this list are troubling. Like, they're not going to provide you with a backpack or a combat, basically a rucksack and a 3-day assault pack is what we called it. Basically, a camping backpack is a 60 liter and an 18 liter is like a school backpack. Bring your own sleeping bag. Bring your own foam mat. Bring your own tactical vest. Bring your own camouflage suit. Bring your own boots. We've discussed this is already happening. Bring your own thermal underwear. Also, okay, we would sometimes do that. Like, you could buy aftermarket high end, like tactical long johns and stuff that were pretty useful. Bring your own waterproof, like, rain suit. But here's where things get even crazier to me. The end, it's you bring your own bulletproof vest or plate carrier with plates. Okay, that's like $200 US for the cheapest plate carrier with a set of class 4 plates. Bring your own tourniquets. Bring your own bandages. Just bananas. Crazy that they are so desperate, really, that you have to bring your own helmet. See if we can find it here. Yeah, armored helmet, and bring your own plate carrier. That's what Russia is reduced to. So I honestly, I see these things and I don't know if Putin is being lied to about the state of his forces, and that's why he seems to not acknowledge how bad things are, but he does seem to have a sense of it. He's just got to realize that he's backed into a corner and he needs to find some sort of off-ramp, some sort of way to reduce or stabilize this conflict. If he wants to remain in power, it's not clear. This is a disaster and it's getting worse. What he should do really is withdraw his forces. He should withdraw his forces, just seethe at NATO, blame the West like he always does, and just stay inside the geographic boundaries of Russia and, like, I don't know, not take over his neighbor's country. That would be a winning solution. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for joining me. As always, if you want to see the combat video breakdowns that YouTube will not let me show you anymore, you want to become a member of the Patreon. Thanks to my Lieutenant Tier patrons. Link is in the description as always, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.